how to start without saying the word soul.
Soul.
Just
Get your souls out of the way.
Yeah, so anytime now, because we're going, but you don't have to go right now, because I can cut off the beginning.
Of course, yeah.
But you're still looking down, you're not looking at it.
Can I start with the word
Wait
right?
a minute, is this the first page?
No, that's the first.
I need to know that.
The first bit is where President Trump is waving his hand. All right.
Right.
It's just that. I mean, that's how it came in the newspaper. So
Right.
it's just for this, actually.
That's how they've scripted it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Ed. So we're in August 2025, just finished, and we've had two very important international summits have occurred within the space of 3 or 4 weeks of each other. It's a pivotal moment in the change of world order and geopolitics. When I say pivotal moment, it's one of these things that happens fairly infrequently. Right, the last big one of equivalent size was 1989-91, the end of the Cold War, and the one before that.
Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the one before that was the end of World War II. Consider those as kind of bookmarks between different world orders, and the world order is now changing again, or at least it's been changing for a while, but now these two summits have made the public aware of it. So the two summits are the Alaska summit between President Trump and President Putin, America and Russia, to discuss the war in Ukraine, but crucially, wider issues between America and Russia as well. And the second summit is something called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I'll come on to later, is a series of Eastern powers, and they've had a summit in China recently, and that also shows the shift in global geopolitics. So we're going to be discussing today an article by a journalist called Andrew Neil, who is an English journalist. Journalists tend to be rather surface phenomena and short term. This is one I've got respect for because he clearly has some knowledge of geopolitical underpinnings of world events.
A political commentator for the BBC, among others.
Yeah, I think he's been on various channels, I think. And I think he's known to some of the audience in America, but he isn't actually an American. So he's politically, he's kind of a liberal conservative, but as I say, with his knowledge of geopolitics, and that makes him different. So the article was written at the time of the first summit, the Alaska summit, in fact before its outcome was known and before this one on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I'll refer to that at the end of the article. So basically you're going to look at this article and I'm going to comment and we're going to discuss it. Okay, so the title of the article tells us quite a lot in its own right. So it's called "The World is Being Remade." And as the Alaska talks show, America and Russia, all too clearly, Britain and Europe are now condemned to the status of observers. And that's important.
Not participators.
Well, what's happening is Europe is one of the, and Britain as well, is the big loser in this change of geopolitical power. Other countries are coming up. Europe is being consigned even more so to the sidelines. Okay, I mean, Europe loses its dominance of world affairs in 1945, the end of World War II, really, but it's kept going, I suppose, by America being the dominant power in the West, and we've been operating on the kind of American geostrategic shield, or dome, if you like, and America has had a multilateral outlook on the world, and they've tended to include their allies. But what's happening now is that, so we consider that to be kind of cloaking device, looking at the world in terms of ideology, and the real power underneath is now coming to the surface. Coming to the surface in the sense of the surface phenomena of ideology has been stripped away, and value projection is become less important, and raw power, which has always been there, But now it's much more obvious. Great power politics are back, and Europe is not one of the great powers. It's America, China, Russia, and India, and a larger number of medium-sized powers. So, if you want to start us off, Ed, and I will come in with comments
as we go along.
As we go, yeah. So, there we go.
Okay. All right then. The future of a European democracy was being determined in Alaska last night without the presence of either that democracy or its European allies. President Trump has decided he can best secure his idea of a peace deal for Ukraine by negotiating one-on-one with President Putin, the Russian dictator and warmonger.
Right, okay, so that sums up, I think, what we just said, that this new world order is here. It's not just between America and Russia, but that's the initial thought there. It's held in Alaska as well. That's interesting as well, isn't it, where Alaska is, if you think of the map. It's where America and Russia are very close, almost meet. There's just a Bering Strait, I don't know what it is, 20 miles or something between them, but about as far away from Europe as you can get. Yes, exactly. And they're supposed to be discussing Ukraine. And other things, though, as I say, that Putin certainly, and Trump as well, they both want to sort of look at wider global relations. And as we'll see in this article later on, Ukraine is just one part of it.
Okay. As I write, the outcome is unknown. But whatever happens, the summit in the snow speaks volumes for the shape of geopolitics to come. A battle for supremacy between an America unapologetically in pursuit of its own self-interest and an alliance of authoritarians who think their time to shuffle America aside and dominate global politics has come.
Right, so again, that shows, well, first of all, it's showing O'Neill's position. He's a standard supporter of the, I will call it the old order. It's difficult to say. It looks like world order's changing, so that will perhaps in future historical perspective be seen as the previous order. So he's a believer in liberal internationalism, the spreading of democracy and market economics and so forth around the world, and neoliberalism, that second one there. So he's kind of lamenting it, isn't he, a little bit there by calling Putin a dictator. And that's another thing that the West tends to do.
Could you say allegedly?
Well, yeah, I mean, he is a kind of, he's elected. There are elections in Russia, but it's not really a proper...
I thought he's quite popular in Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably would have won the elections anyway, but he does fiddle them as well. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why he needs to do that. But this value projection is something integral to the previous order, and it's where the power elite in the West is speaking, not so much to other countries, but, well, partly that, but mostly because we're a democracy, they need to mobilise support for things. So it's a lot easier to say, well, we're doing X, Y, and Z because X is a dictator and a bad guy and got to be sorted out, rather than say, as you said there, naked power, we need, for military security or economic reasons, it's got some important resource or something like that, that will gain less support.
Okay. It's a battle for the 21st century in which Europe, including Britain, has already been consigned to the sidelines.
Right, so as you say, Europe wasn't a member of this summit. They've been scrambling over this whole Ukraine business, and Trump trying to fix it and negotiating with Putin. They didn't want to talk to Putin, and they've been scrambling even to get a voice in the diplomacy.
You might think Trump would want to marshal America's European allies in this existential fight between democracy and autocracy. But that is not the Trump way. He regards the Europeans as an inconvenience, an encumbrance.
Right, so marshalling the European allies in multilateralism, that's the way things were done during the Cold War and in the second period that I mentioned between the fall of the Berlin Wall and now. Okay, but now things are changing, so it's more now about sort of naked self-interest, as they've termed.
Okay. In his eyes, they are too squeamish to go along with the harsh might is right realpolitik deals
yeah.
he's prepared to do with the dictators, whatever the consequences for democracy, human rights, sovereignty, or the rule of law.
Right.
Yet too weak to stand up to them on their own.
Right, so that's interesting again. It's juxtaposing the sort of liberal value projection of the previous era and this more sort of power competition era that's approaching now, and also the other thing you just said there, the Europeans are weak.
We're too soft to do the...
Well, they're weak both in the fact that they don't have much political will, but they are sort of weak in the sense.
Right. In his eyes, they are too squeamish to go along with the harsh might is right realpolitik deals he's prepared to do with the dictators, whatever the consequences for democracy, human rights, sovereignty, or the rule of law. Yet too weak to stand up to them on their own.
Right, so a number of things from that. So he's saying that the Europeans are too weak, one, because they've not got the political will to do things, and they're used to the old way of doing things where it's based on value projection, and they're reluctant to shift to more blatant power politics. One reason being they don't have the power, so that automatically relegates them to the second rank, the medium power rank. Okay, but not the top rank of international politics.
Mm. He considers Ukraine to be a sideshow. He wants America out. He has bigger fish to fry elsewhere, and if he can extricate the US with a Nobel Peace Prize under his arm and lucrative US access to Russian and Ukrainian minerals under his belt, then so much the better.
Right, so this shows again the trend there that he wants America out, and the bigger fish elsewhere is that we're talking about a shift in American policy from Europe up to Eastern Asia, which has been going on, by the way, before Trump, but Trump has really sort of put boosters on it, and then it's mixed in there with Trump's own personal ambitions that, he would like a peace prize out of this as well. So there's a combination of factors there contributing to what Trump is doing. And
go on his mantelpiece.
Yeah.
If the Europeans don't like it, that's their problem. Putin's imperial ambitions are to re-establish Russian dominance over what Moscow calls its near abroad. Those border countries like Ukraine, which used to be part of the Russian Empire. That is very different from the global ambitions of Soviet communism.
Right, now this is important. So the near abroad is the countries that border Russia that were previously part of the Soviet Union, but Russia still considers those to be a sphere of influence. And in the case of Ukraine, of course, and some of the others, it considers them to be part of Russia and sort of semi-illegitimate, really. Doesn't consider Ukraine to be a proper independent country. So Russia, having the Soviet Union collapsed, has had its power reduced. Now it's coming back somewhat, not to the scale that it was before, but its influence is spreading its influence in these adjacent countries. So that's an important point to the future and a difference there. When we had the Soviet Union, we had a bipolar world. Both were global powers, America more so than the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union had a communist ideology, of course, as well, which was a global ideology with global ambitions, whereas Russia, the difference now is it's not an ideology. It doesn't actually, they don't actually call themselves authoritarian. That's a juxtaposition of the West onto them in order, as I said, to mobilise support. So that's one difference, no ideology, and the other difference is Russia's ambitions are kind of now limited to the immediate bordering countries rather than global, regional rather
That's
than global.
quite reasonable.
Yeah, and that's important because this whole geopolitical shift is leading to this multipolar world. So in Russia's
So he's not interested in spreading into NATO countries.
well, that's a controversial thing. I mean, I don't think that it's strong enough to do that, and that's the big difference from,
But the West
it's
regurgitates this.
Yeah,
Putin's evil. Putin's going to
that's
come
right.
into our.
And especially the journalists and the commentators who don't really know very much, they're mixing up the invasion of Ukraine and they're saying, well, he's part of a kind of swoop on into Europe and NATO. That is totally wrong. They're two different things. Ukraine is far more important to Russia than the rest of what was the old Warsaw Pact or NATO.
I would say for resources, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe.
Yeah, certainly it's one of the big resources there, agriculturally wise.
I don't know about oil and.
It doesn't have its own oil particularly, but more important than that is the sort of the cultural, ethnic, historical links between Russia and Ukraine. Russia considers it to be all one country, right? Those are very close. It's like slight differences, like whatever they do between England and Scotland, or between one American state and another, but also very close.
Okay. For Trump, that makes Russia a regional problem, and the region is Europe. As Vice President J.D. Vance made clear while on holiday in Britain this week, Americans have had enough of paying for Ukraine.
Right, so again, emphasising this regional business, and that America, as we'll see, has its own region, which, just to preempt a little bit, is going to be North and South America, and let Europe sort of go its own way. And also there you've got the unique short-term, if you like, Trumpian input in terms of he's a businessman, not a geopolitician, and he wants to make some money out of these things as well.
And Vance also said they're sick of it, claiming that the US was done funding Kyiv, or Kiev as I
Kiev
like to know it.
Yeah, it's spelled, Kiev is. Yeah, so again, same thing, it's the money there. America, one of the reasons that America has always subsidised Europe, you see, when it was under NATO, and even during the Cold War, America spent more on defence.
5% he's advising us all to
that's right,
step up to.
Right. Well, the figures at the moment are that America spends about $900 billion a year.
It's not small change, is it?
Not small change. That's 3.5% of America's gross national product. The whole of Europe and the rest of NATO put together is about 500 billion, but that's only 2% of their GNP. So America, in proportion to its size, even if it is bigger, of course, is spending roughly twice as much on a proportion to its size than Europe.
So it's understandable they're a bit myth.
Absolutely. It's always been an issue, but that issue is now coming really to a head under Trump with this more money-orientated attitude to things.
So, and if European states don't like Trump's version of peace, they're free to continue supporting Ukraine on their own, including with US arms. Indeed, they can fill the boots, provided it's cash up front.
Yeah, so again, you see America, a bit more emphasis under Trump on the money. He's happy for them to do it, if they're by American. There's a scheme now where America's withdrawn, giving military support directly to Ukraine, but it's said to Europe, if you want to carry on, you can buy the weapons off us.
Yeah, crack on.
And give them to Ukraine. So essentially America is withdrawing, it's getting it for free.
Well, then are they going back to being isolationists in a way?
That's a big question, Ed, a very big question. Historically, before 1941, America was broadly speaking isolationist for the first, 150 years of its existence, and then since World War II it's been internationalist, of course. So we're looking at a really historical change now. Whether it'll go fully isolationist, maybe unilateral, which means still playing a role in the world, but acting more unilaterally and not necessarily with allies. That might be a slightly more accurate term than isolationist, but we'll see how that's going. Things are certainly going in that direction.
Okay. But the geopolitics of the mid-2020s and beyond is about much more than Ukraine. The bipolar world of the Cold War, dominated since 1945 by America and the Soviet Union, came to an end in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of Russian communism. There followed a unipolar period in which the US was the world's sole undisputed superpower, or hyperpower, as one French politician designated it.
Right, so we've touched on this in our discussion. It's just putting it into proper perspective that you've got these world orders, bipolar world order from 45 to 89. then we call it unipolar moment now. This
I prefer the hyperpolar. That's quite
well,
catchy, isn't it?
hyperpower. That's a phrase that was invented to distinguish it from the superpowers. So you had before World War II, you had great powers. There was various numbers, up to about 7 of them. Then you had superpowers. So the term was there to distinguish from great powers that this is something bigger and above great powers. And then you down to one briefly after the
What, a power above all other powers?
yeah, more powerful. The number diminishes.
One.
Yeah, the number diminishes from 7 to 2.
And that's America, is it?
And then to 1 now, the America, the hyperpower.
Mm.
But there's disputes of how long this hyperpower period.
I think it
after
should be
lasted.
short-lived.
Well, that's the way it's looking like, and now it's just giving a bit of perspective there.
Then, from the start of this century came the steady rise of China. For a time it looked as if we were returning to a bipolar world, this time dominated by Washington and Beijing. But the Chinese communists do not seek global dominance in the way the Soviet communists once did.
Right, so it's looking like we're leading to a multipolar world, but the 4 bigger ones are America, China, Russia, and India, but they're not all equal. And
But is there a theory that each one can operate separate?
yes. That's the theory of multipolarity. So they're independent actors. But China and America certainly are probably more powerful still than Russia and India. And the other point there is, again, about communism, that Soviet communism was a global power. That's gone, the global ideology aspect of it. And China, even though it's nominally communist, it's now what's called one country, two systems internally.
They have a balance.
Yeah, but that's internally. But externally, China isn't trying to spread communism around the world, or even authoritarianism. But we think that's the way it looks like at the moment. Might change, but that's the way it does look that's happening. So again, that's a change, you see, from the Cold War.
So what they want, being the Chinese, is supremacy in their own backyard, East Asia and the Asian Pacific, and a world in which the rules are more favourably inclined to them rather than, as they have been since the end of the Second World War, America. To this end, China has enlisted a number of nations, all led by dictators or elected strongmen, it's always men, who also have an interest in curbing American power and reconfiguring a global architecture more to their liking.
Right, so again, this fits in with the idea of multipolarity, and China's sphere of influence he's talking about now is East Asia and the Western Pacific. And at least for now, what's happening is that we're moving from one world order to another, and there's various other countries around the world that are sort of objecting to the Western domination of things that we've just had. And now they're growing in power, they're finding their voices, and we're seeing what is, from an international relations theoretical perspective, in a multipolar world and balance of power, the weaker ones kind of allying to try and balance the stronger ones. So America's the strongest one, and it's been a bit, under Trump, it's been most forceful as well, and it's attracting a counterbalancing power between China plus some of these others who are now trying to assert more independence from it. That's the immediate situation.
I would have thought they want total independence.
Yes, absolutely, they do, yes.
And they don't want him interfering.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's the immediate thing. And then that's what you just described there. That's the thing down the road a little bit. Or maybe we're there now, actually.
And we don't know.
Where we've got the multipolar world, where, you've got regional spheres of influence, and then they come together to decide either formally or informally the new rules of the game, right?
Oh, that's maybe what they were discussing.
Which he's talking about there, will emerge with this new world order, and it will be a voice less for the West, and especially less for the ideological imperatives. This business he mentioned earlier, didn't he, about democracy and human rights and all this stuff, that idea, what's called liberal internationalism, or in layman's terms, going around the world telling everybody else what to do. And if
The
they
world's
don't-
police force.
yeah, and if they don't like it, bombing them, those days are over. Those days are over. And Europe has been particularly prominent in that, along with the United States. But the United States is now under Trump no longer doing that.
He doesn't want to be. He
He
wants-
doesn't want to be the world's policeman. He
No.
doesn't want to pay for it. That's the main thing, I think, from Trump.
Mm.
The Europeans are left still wanting that world order, but they've, as he said earlier, they've not got the power to enforce it or the will to enforce it. So they're in a bind. So that's what this thing's about, the decline of Europe and its ability to impose whatever, its influence on the world.
To me, it sounds like it could be a better world
Possibly, yeah, definitely.
everybody's left to
yeah.
what they want to do.
In terms of international security, I think, yeah.
And nobody's going over there and doing
Yeah,
that over
yeah,
there. Or,
yeah, I mean, I'm not passing a moral judgment. Obviously, O'Neill has got sympathy with the old order and the sort of liberal order, which is kind of passing away. He's kind of lamenting it. One of the points I'd made, though, these things are happening anyway due to the shifts in world power, changes in economic growth, shifts in military spending. Okay, and then they feed through into diplomatic influence in the world, and that's what's happening now. It's been happening for a while, this, and now we're actually seeing it bubbling through into actual events with these summits, and the public is becoming aware of it for the first time.
yeah, okay. Enter an alliance of the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which first met in 2006, though South Africa did not join until 2010, and expanded to 10 countries when Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates joined last year, and Indonesia in January.
2025. Right, so that elaborates what we've just been saying there, that the non-Western powers, the antis, the ones who want to form a new configuration of power, a new world order, are beginning to cooperate. And BRICS is one of the two big international organisations organised by the Eastern powers, by China and Russia, not by the West. There's no Western country listed there in the BRICS, and BRICS have been around for a while, and even in the public consciousness for a while. Now, I mentioned that this article was written after the Alaska Summit, before this new summit called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's the other big non-Western grouping. There's quite a bit of overlap between that and the BRICS. That now is coming into public view as well, which I'll talk about that at the end, but because he doesn't mention it in this article, but BRICS certainly is. People are aware of that and have heard of it.
Okay. Their aim is a shift in international economic power from America and the West to the developing world, of which they are the most important members. It would also be a shift to a less democratic world.
Yeah, so that's their aim. Again, it's mirroring the sort of shifts that are going on anyway. I think he's going to mention some figures in a minute of what proportion of the world they've got. So that's happening kind of automatically, if you like, and now we're seeing the diplomatic manifestation of it in terms of these groupings. But it's still fairly loose grouping, and they're looking not mostly at economics. There is some security involvement as well, especially between China and Russia. So it's early days at the moment, but nonetheless, it's a big trend this is on the eastern side of things. This whole thing, what's happening is the West is going into relative decline, and the East is coming up. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. This century was meant to usher in the universal triumph of democracy. Instead, its most persistent and dismal characteristic has been the march of the autocrats.
Right, okay, so again, ideology is changing. International politics is about power, ultimately. That's been disguised in the West and over the last few decades by ideology, and people have got a misperception that it's about ideology. Okay, what's happening now. The West probably still is going to carry on ideological, but these others are not really ideological. It's those who are sort of characterising them as autocrats and authoritarians. Okay, there's nobody in China or Russia saying autocracy is the great way of doing things, like it was under communism. They were trying to spread communism, saying communism was an alternative to the West. They're not actually saying autocracy is that's us characterising them as autocrats in order to sort of sharpen out the differences, and especially for power elites in the West to mobilise support amongst the publics within the West.
Okay. This has become such big business that India, which has very little oil of its own, is now Europe's largest oil supplier, having overtaken even Saudi Arabia. Trump knows all this, which is why he regards not just China, but the BRICS alliance as one of the greatest 21st century threats to American predominance.
Yeah, so obviously America was 1 of 1 briefly in that hyperpower period, and now it's going to be 1 of 4. Does he say something there about the BRICS having 50% of the world's...
Oh, wait a minute.
Just go back to that, if that's important. I'm not sure whether you missed that. Or maybe it's coming up.
Between them, they account for 50% of the world's population and 40% of global GDP.
Right. So
this is
that's the BRICS countries, the ones that he mentioned there, the 4 starting ones, and then the other 5 or 6 adding on. So again, in this shift of world power, we're now at a kind of pivotal crossover period. These things happen fairly slowly, but that's bigger than the G7. Right, 40% of world GNP, that will be under purchasing power parity, which is the method now used by international economists to compare countries. Right, and then there's some other countries in the world. So that we're now at a kind of pivotal point where the non-West is overtaking the West in total size of economics, not yet in military spending, but in economics, but they're getting closer in military spending as well, and in global influence. So that's why things are changing now as we get into this shift, this real shift that's kind of automatic, and there you see there the diplomatic manifestation of it.
Yeah. Okay. You might think he'd want to give this alliance a bloody nose in Ukraine, but this is not a war of his choosing, and he doesn't really care about the outcome. He wants to end it swiftly with whatever terms he can get away with and regroup his resources for battles to come.
Right, so that's President Trump he's talking about there. So we're back to this America's role in the world now as it becomes 1 of 4, and China...
So they're not going to pull out, be totally isolationist. They've got battles upcoming.
Yeah, well, they're manoeuvring now as 1 of 4, but still probably just about the number 1. But the chief challenger is China, not Russia. Okay, so that's why the shifting, the disengaging from this is strategy, you see. You know, you're shifting your forces, shifting your effort, your diplomatic effort, your military forces.
But China doesn't want to kick off with anyone.
Well, so it's a different perspective. From America's perspective, they're number 1. They want to remain number 1. They see China,
in every way.
China, full spectrum dominance, they call that. So it's economics, military, different aspects of military, diplomatic dominance, institutional dominance.
But you can't always have your cake and eat it.
No, exactly. And the power's changing. But
you have to share it.
Yeah, so that's about shifting the American effort away from Europe towards the Pacific and to face down on balance China if they can.
He has already imposed 50% tariffs on Brazil and India, which will hurt both countries, and he might well refuse to go to the next meeting of the G20 because it is in South Africa, whose government he loathes.
Right, so again, he's up. America doesn't like this alliance of the Antis, and the Antis are coming together. They don't have a great deal in common, a lot of them, except they don't like the Western, especially American, domination. So it's kind of creating a counter-reaction.
You could say it's understandable that they don't like it.
Well, a balance of power theorists would say, well, that's...
If they've been kept down.
No surprise. It's just the mechanism of how the balance of power works. If number 1 becomes a bit too over-assertive, it creates a counter-reaction amongst the others.
Trump is also threatening the other BRICS members with penal tariffs if they dare even to think about launching a rival currency to the dollar, a highly unlikely development, though it's one that he takes seriously. Of course, all this comes at a cost. India is inevitably drawing closer to Russia again after decades of Washington encouraging it to loosen its Moscow ties.
Right, okay, so a couple of things there. India is an interesting role. It's probably the fourth of the great powers just coming up. And India's playing a careful balancing game between East and West. It's had good relations in the past with Russia, and Russia supplies it with arms and stuff, and now oil, of course, over this Ukraine business. Its relations with China are not great, but America's been courting it. But India is not automatically, just because it's a democracy, part of the West. It's an independent great power actor that's balancing its interests, moving them around as it goes, depending on what the situation is. The other thing there is about the international financial system, which is being dominated by the American dollar until recently. So again, that reflects America's geopolitical dominance since World War II. So again, when you get a change in geopolitics, you also both get a change in international finance and economics, but economics also propels that change in geopolitics to do with the differential growth rates of economies and therefore different, it's not that somebody's going down in real terms, but if others are coming up faster, then the ones who are growing slower, they're gradually losing their share. Mm-hmm. And again, back to this business of who makes the rules, and the economic and financial rules are part of the global rule system. So these others are kind of challenging and potentially threatening to replace the dollar with various things that have been moved to it. Maybe gold might come back. China, for example, has been buying, and Russia, but buying a lot of gold over the last few years.
And we haven't got any more.
England, well, again, as I say, Europe, we sold all our gold, a lot of it too much.
At a low price as well?
At a very low price, and it was $250 to the ounce in about 1999 under Tony Blair.
But empires have risen and fallen throughout time.
Throughout time, and quite often.
So surely this has happened many, many times.
Yeah, of course it has, absolutely.
And it'll continue to happen.
Yeah, it's just that because they grow and fall over long periods in terms of a human lifetime, we've become accustomed to thinking the world political system is somehow fixed. And for many decades, as we've mentioned, those various...
Didn't you mention to me on a previous occasion that 200 years is a figure that sometimes an empire is...
Well, there's no fixed period. No, it varies. You'd have to look at each individual world order and empire to view that. There's no...
But the Roman Empire kind of faded away.
Yeah, but that lasted a long time. That lasted 500 years.
So they did quite well.
Yeah.
And we did not so bad.
Britain, yeah. Well, British Empire, from whatever, when would you say the British Empire starts? Under Elizabeth, perhaps.
The first.
Yeah, so 1588, Spanish Armada comes to an end in 1945, 1947, let's say, when India becomes independent.
Right, so the last part of the first half is Brazil and South Africa now regard China as a more reliable ally than America. But none of this matters very much to Trump. What does, above all else, is his own backyard. Right,
so again, we're looking at this regionalisation of world politics, and America's still going to have a big sphere of influence, covering which we'll come on to North and South America, but it's not the whole world or the maximum peak of power that it was after World War II, when it pushed across the Pacific up to Japan and China, and in the Atlantic, of course, with the collapse of Europe, dominate NATO, what was the old Iron Curtain, and then a further expansion with the end of the Cold War and into the Middle East as well. That was under Jimmy Carter in 1979. That was America at its absolute maximum as a global power. Now it's moving back, retreating somewhat, not to nothing, still a very powerful country, but now to what is a hemisphere power.
For me, I like the idea of what's to come.
Yeah.
As long as it's peaceful.
Yes, well, that's the thing. I mean, different world configurations can be peaceful.
Because I'd like us to go back to us being, can we be isolationists?
Right, okay.
as
Well,
Great Britain.
that's an interesting thing. Yeah, I think Britain, as one of the medium powers of Europe, as the title said, it's going to
Could
have
we not join the go that way
go
and join in with them
with
to
who?
BRICS? That would be controversial. wouldn't it?
That would be controversial. Yeah, yeah. I was just going to say Britain's power is declining further.
So can we not jump on their bandwagon?
Well, we've got opportunities possibly to
Drop the Americans and jump on the.
Right. Well, that would be a massive change if we did that. That would be very.
But you could say it's forward thinking.
Yeah, maybe. It's difficult to say what Britain's future is.
But we've always done our eat.
Yeah, we just have to try and manoeuvre between these now giants that are emerging around us.
But as a minnow, don't you have to join with the new whale, so to speak?
You could do, yeah. Probably we'll stick with them, maybe with them.
So we're not going to twist. We're going to stick.
It's
In your opinion,
it's unknown. Well, Britain's in a bit of a bind, to be honest, as we'll come on to later. With it, Britain's options are limiting. We're just going to have to retreat back to our size, to our medium size. Britain's had a tradition in the days of empire, and of course even afterwards on America's.
I think we've accepted the end of our empire.
We've accepted the end of our empire, yeah, but the establishment hasn't accepted the Britain's falling back to its natural size. We've always had to have a role bigger than our weight.
Well, I think we should accept that.
Yeah, I agree with you, but the British establishment doesn't, and they're in a real
Well,
bind.
they'll have to change.
Yeah, they will be forced to.
Because the world won't change to their view.
No, they will be forced to, but it's going to be kicking and screaming, I think.
I'd like to watch that.
Well, if you're anti-establishment, then yes, that's going to be a good spectacle
Yeah.
to observe.
Very good.
Okay, so we'll have a look. Just check here.
Ha ha!
Right, so you've the last 4 lines there,
Yeah.
and then you're there.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's why I did that.
Right.
You put it out in a weird way.
No, it's just that it's, you know how newspapers folded with 2 sheets, and it just occurs that it's on actually 2 different sheets, so I've had to cut out all the silly other stuff. And
Oh, the arms.
and
Roger, you've not used your arms.
Yeah, you
yet.
have to use your
I
arms.
have a little bit, yeah. Not
Can we have some more of that?
not full on ones, yeah.
Yeah, everybody loves that.
We love
So-
your
so
arms.
I've just
Not
had-
what you say, just your
So I've
arms.
just had to cut it like that to put in my file. I don't want all the other crap in there.
Yeah.
This is, you know,
Oh yeah, what somebody's had for the dinner.
So,
well, whatever, yeah.
right. So gusto and arms.
Right.
He's armless. He is.
Yeah.
Right, are we right? Oh, it's on, is it? It's a fool's errand to try to construct from the accumulated grievances and destructive narcissism that guide Donald Trump a coherent, overarching geopolitical strategy. At times, mere presidential whim seems the best explanation of his actions and attitudes, but there is some method in the madness.
Right, so this is a bit of a conundrum, isn't it, of what Trump's worldview is. Commentators are stuck with that. As I said, he's coming from a business background to a geopolitical, in charge of a country, and it's different. A country is business plus this.
But he's trying to operate a country as a business.
Yeah, but it's not just a business, which is the problem. But by default, we're getting to this geopolitical vision is kind of emerging almost by default. And some of the people around him, like Vance, and I've forgotten his name now, the Defence Secretary, Hegseth, is he called? Hegseth or something. They're more full on America First people.
Can you repeat? You'll have to go through that again. Can you remember it and then go through it?
Right, I think he's called Hegseth, isn't he?
Hegseth.
The Defence Secretary. Yes, he is.
Right.
Sorry, you want me to say that again? Right, okay, so starting my response to that little first bit that you've written there, that you've read there. Right, so this is a conundrum for commentators of what Trump's worldview is. He's coming from a business background into a geopolitical background, a geopolitical situation where he's president of the United States. So he's responsible for business plus geopolitics as well. So it's a bit of a problem there. Now, some of the people around him are more geopolitical, such as Vance, the Vice President, Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, and no doubt others as well. So an America First vision is emerging, but we'll see if it carries on after Trump as well. That's another interesting point.
Right. Insofar as there is a Trump worldview, not one he has ever articulated, but which we can broadly discern from his priorities and prejudices to date, it is scarily similar to the dystopian world of George Orwell's seminal novel 1984.
Right, okay. So I think he's going to go on there to describe some of the geopolitical features of George Orwell. So George Orwell was writing in 1949, and we're in the bipolar world, right? So he's looking forward into the future to America and Russia, and I think China is also one of his three great powers. And then the peculiarity of Orwell is he's assuming they could become authoritarian, so that's something separate.
Yeah. In Orwell's grim scenario, the globe is dominated by three totalitarian behemoths: Oceania, the Western Hemisphere with the UK tacked on, Eurasia, in which Europe is dominated by an overpowering Russia, and East Asia, made up of China and the Eastern Pacific Rim, including Japan, South Korea, and even parts of northern India, but dominated by Beijing. Trump world is beginning to take shape with some of these configurations.
Right, so as I say, that's Orwell's.
So
he's writing in 1950, obviously trying to project into the future.
So his fiction is slowly...
Well, partly. Yeah, you've got the three powers there.
Europe is being left to its own devices to deal with revanchist,
It means revenge in French.
Russia, which Trump does not see as a threat to the USA, nor does Europe's fate seem to trouble him.
Right, well, that's interesting. Again, I think we mentioned earlier about our current commentators in the liberal West mixing up Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which of course was provoked by NATO expansion that Russia perceives as a threat to its security. And we've explained how close Ukraine is in terms of cultural and ethnic and historical terms with Russia, from Russia sweeping into Europe, and those two things are definitely different.
So he would say that Europe should deal with Europe's problems.
Yes, and that's again part of the
and that NATO comes into that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Much to Trump's annoyance, Ukraine has dragged America back to Europe just as it was pivoting to the Pacific, where America's real 21st century geopolitical challenges lie.
Right, which you just said.
Makes sense.
Which you just said. But interesting also, we're looking at broad geopolitical shifts here, and yes, it's emerging.
And geographical.
Yeah, that's the same thing.
He wants to deal with in relation to what's near to them.
Yeah, that's what geopolitical means, the combination of global politics and geography, in some areas more important than others.
So Pacific more than...
Yeah, exactly. But you do have this little problem of the politics that is also a day-to-day thing. So you get things cropping up unexpectedly, and various special interest groups, whatever, trying to pressurise you to do things and focus your attention on day-to-day things, which a lot of leaders kind of tend to do, and it's more difficult for them to keep this broader vision, given you limited
So he doesn't want to be the world's police.
No, well, interestingly, we described earlier how America was the world power. It had 40% of world production at that point, back in 1945, just after the World War II, 1957. Now it's down to 16%. So if you've got a huge empire that's built up when you peak your power and your economic base declines relative to others, it's all relative, by the way.
Then it won't return to that.
No, it's more difficult, of course, to maintain something.
Yeah.
So you're having to sort of retreat somewhat.
Equally irritatingly, the fallout from events in Gaza has forced America to become more deeply involved in the Middle East again, despite the fact, as Trump never tires of telling us, the US is now self-sufficient in oil and gas. For Trump, Europe and the Middle East are so 20th century.
Right. In other words, he's trying to get away to a new vision of America's power, a new geopolitical...
And we keep dragging him back.
Yeah, so the Middle East, just a little bit of detail on that, becomes an American interest after World War II, really, as the British Empire and the French Empire retreat. But in 1979, after the second oil crisis, America starts to intervene in the Middle East seriously, sets up something called the Joint Task Force, which later becomes Central Command, and from that point, that's under President Carter, we can add the Middle East as American interest, right? But that's now changing again, and we're retreating from it because America no longer needs Middle Eastern oil due to fracking and other energy resources and so forth. Still imports oil, but it can import it from South America and Canada, more close areas. So it's really America's possibly now ex-allies, Europe and Japan, that are more dependent on Middle Eastern oil, not America itself.
So, as Epictetus might say, you should only concentrate on what you can control and let the rest deal with themselves.
That sounds a good strategic advice. Yeah, definitely. You've got to cut your interests at some point
Cut your cloth accordingly.
To your resources. Yeah. So when your resources go up, empires tend to expand. When the resources go down relative to others, it becomes difficult to maintain those extremities of empire. At some point, you have to correction. So what's happening now is this correction. It might not seem like it because he's, I'll talk about America great again and all that.
So we should do that to concentrate on internal affairs.
I'll talk about internal affairs and consolidate on what perhaps is more important, practical for you internationally as well. All empires have to do it, either voluntarily or
involuntarily.
Yeah.
Because it's happening.
It's happening anyway. If you don't do it, you get caught out in an overextended situation.
In no man's land.
Yeah, the classic case for Britain, we're speaking from Britain, is the Suez Crisis in 1956. Our power had gone. We tried to maintain our bit of empire there.
So we could learn from our
definitely
mistakes.
Or any empire, really. Yeah.
So, nor is Trump overly exercised about an Eastern Pacific Rim dominated by China, which does not bode well for Taiwan should Beijing try to take it by force or strangle it with sanctions. His tariff wars are not designed to curb the expansion of Chinese influence in the East Pacific, since he slapped them on friend and foe alike.
Okay, now this is an uncertainty of whether he's, on the one hand, America's shifting to oppose its single most powerful opponent, China, as it comes up. But that's suggesting that he's perhaps not, he may give some ground there. So yeah, he's right that the tariffs, which are designed for various things, one of which is to get revenue, have been slapped on some of these Southeast Asian countries that are either neutral or friendly. Japan, I think it's 25% on Japan and 15% perhaps on Japan and South Korea. But one of the highest ones is Vietnam and Cambodia and some of these Southeast Asian countries, they're kind of neutral. So it's not just, on the face of it anyway, directed directly against China. So the verdict's a bit out of there where the border of American power is going to be in East. China will push it back gradually, I suppose. Now, whether it will voluntarily pull back and how far, that's for...
But his tactic is to bring them to the table by slapping a high tariff.
Well, in terms of tariffs, I suppose, and economic...
If you were talking about that on its own.
Yeah, but that it fits in. Tariffs fit in with American self-sufficiency, right? Which fits in with America first. So it does link in with that. And there's multiple reasons and causes that have been put forward for the tariff, I think.
If anything, they will reinforce China's position, as those powers on that rim, America's allies, such as Japan and South Korea, make their peace with China because they fear America is no longer a reliable ally.
Right, so in the short term, these tariffs are putting some of these ex-American allies off because they're the old part of the previous world order is free trade and what's called neoliberal economics. They don't like tariffs. Trump is harking back to a time when America had tariffs before the First World War. So he's upsetting some of his allies as well as his opponents by this. And they're therefore having to kind of reconsider their position in the world. If America's going to be pulling back, not just economically, but geopolitically as well, and especially these countries in between America and China, Japan being the single most important one, of some of these other countries. They're seeing the rise of China. They're watching whether America is going to pull back, where the line's going to be, and they might then have to consider, if it does, they will have to reconsider their
positions.
Yes, exactly.
But Trump has an overriding quid pro quo for all of this. If China and Russia are to be allowed relatively free rein in their backyards, then so must America in its backyard, by which he means the whole Western Hemisphere.
Right, so again, back it was mentioned earlier about how the multipolar world is naturally a world of regional spheres of influence, and America, of course, will have its own sphere of influence, which I think he's going to go on to say, well, he just said it there, is the Western Hemisphere, so that's North and South America, which is still, in terms of size, the biggest single sphere of influence. It's just that it's somewhat smaller than what America has had over recent decades.
Right. We are moving towards a new geopolitical structure in which the US will have retreated from Europe and East Asia as spheres where it exercised influence and projected power, but is asserting imperial ambitions closer to home. Hence the emphasis from the first days of his second administration on Greenland, Canada and Panama, all of which are urged, perhaps even threatened, to come under US tutelage one way or another.
Right, so I've kind of just said
by agreement or force.
Yeah, that's basically what I've just said. Interestingly, that mirrors what happened when America was rising. The first, after internal colonisation, the first area it looked at, so we're looking at the late 19th century here, was that area of North America. The Caribbean was quite, important in those days. It's now a mere part of it.
Well, he wants Greenland as a state, doesn't he?
Yeah, so I'm just saying that in the rise, the first thing was they looked at North America, those areas. There was border disputes with Canada and so forth, disputes in South America, Central America, and now as it's sort of retreating somewhat toward all, it's like history's mirroring itself.
Well, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, and now, well, it's kind
and
of
repeats itself.
Well, it's kind of you've got the rise, right? Sort of regional first, and then it becomes global after Pearl Harbor and World War II, and now it's retreating back to regional. So
in theory, it will expand again after it's.
Well, no, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. Actually, I'm just saying as it retreats, we're now back to a regional power.
Okay.
Pretty big regional power. Obviously, North and South America is 16 million square miles. It's a third of the world's land area.
Quite large.
So, yeah, very large, in fact.
Just as Trump has drawn inspiration for his tariffs from a late 19th century president, William McKinley, so his worldview is shaped by an earlier 19th century president, James Monroe, who gave his name to the Monroe Doctrine, which essentially amounted to America telling the rest of the world, the Western Hemisphere is our hemisphere, keep out.
Yeah, exactly. So McKinley was president just before 1900. I think he got assassinated, actually.
And then there's Monroe before that.
Monroe Doctor, I think, is 1823. So, yes, it's American isolationism and Western Hemisphere is ours, keep out.
Okay. A lesser known part of this doctrine is that it also contained its own quid pro quo, committing America to staying out of European disputes or conflict, which, of course, we can also see is part of the Trump inclination to isolationism, of which J.D. Vance is a true believer.
Right, well, I mentioned Vance earlier. So the early American presidents, they were warned, or the American presidents themselves, warned against what they called entangling alliances. So in those days, Europe was kind of the centre of world politics. America just got its independence and wanted to get away from Europe, basically, and do its own thing. So it's isolationist with this Monroe Doctrine, but also keep away from Europe. You do your own thing, right? We're not going to interfere. We can't interfere. America was only small at that point, and we'll do our own thing in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah. So there we have it. A new geopolitical architecture for a more multipolar world in which Trump is content to let rival power centres flourish, provided they leave America and its hemisphere alone, and US economic and military power remains predominant.
Yeah, so that's the full picture there. So yes, America, none of these others are going to have the power or the inclination really to interfere too much in the Western Hemisphere. Although China's trading power, some of the South American countries, Brazil for example, which was mentioned earlier, I think trades more with China now than it does with America. But America's still got predominant influence in the Western Hemisphere. Now, whether it will remain the dominant military and economic power as it described there, that's not completely under their own control. It depends what the others do as
And
well.
India trade a lot with Russia for oil and
Yeah. Well, this whole business of the Ukraine war and the sanctions on Russia and the secondary sanctions on India, which I'll talk about a bit about that at the end, is reconfiguring the trading balances of the world and as well as the geopolitical. The two go together.
And Germany take a lot of power or gas from Russia.
Well, they did do.
Or they did.
They did do.
But they're kind of being forced to.
But they've now taken an anti-Russian stance. But of course, that's a problem. Where do they get their energy from?
You can't just click your fingers and.
They've shut down the coal. Germany, the only real natural energy source is coal. Well, the environmentalists don't like coal's out of fashion, so they've shut down most of the coal mines. They've shut down the nuclear
What do they
power.
do? Yeah.
So they're in a bit of a bind, and Europe, as I think it's going to mention, is sort of now a backwater. In Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, recently has been suffering. So again, that's part
They're
of
under
it.
pressure
Yes.
themselves.
Yeah.
So they'll be thinking about which direction they want to go in.
Yeah, the whole of Europe is in a problem now because the American umbrella has been, we think, not absolutely certain. Of course, Trump might lose the next election and he might try to reassert the old order, so it's a bit of a flux, maybe. But they're certainly having to think seriously about how they look after themselves and what their role in the world, Europe as a whole, Britain, Germany, without automatic American protection and support.
Okay. Where all this leaves Europe in general and Britain in particular is unclear,
All right, saying that now.
though probably not in a good place. Certainly, the European Union's pretensions to become a great power in its own right have come to naught.
Right, okay, so Europe is America is struggling, it's trying to reassert itself, but also that's kind of covering a retreat. The various Eastern powers, China, Russia, India, some others in the global south are coming up. Europe and also I would say Japan is the biggest losers in this change of power distribution.
Yeah. Remember the Lisbon Agenda, devised by Brussels 25 years ago. It projected how the EU would vault past the US to become the most dynamic and competitive knowledge economy in the world by 2010.
Right, and I think it's going to go on to say that that's not happened.
Instead, the US economy has left Europe in the dust, while a hollowed-out European military struggles desperately to re-equip itself for a world in which it cannot rely on America.
Right, so that's kind of what I just
So
said.
they're playing catch-up, is it?
Well, they're in decline. The whole of the West is in decline, but Europe is declining faster, relatively speaking, than America because its economy is growing very slowly. I think something like 1 to 2% over a period of years since whatever COVID.
So he's going to.
Whereas America is slowed as well, but not as much. So Europe's relative weight in terms of economic strength is slipping back. Its military weight has gone back, particularly since the end of the Cold War. I mentioned earlier that America is spending 3.5% of its GNP on defence, Europe an average of only 2%, from a slightly smaller economy now. So the things that,
But Europe's and Britain's going to go up to 5%.
well, they're claiming they've tried to put up to 5%, but with
Starmer's promised that.
3.5% of that is real defence expenditure. 1.5% is a bit of accountancy fudge, but that's a projection. I'll tell
Not
you.
a reality.
I'll tell you now. The chances of that
It's not
happening
happening.
are very, very low because Europe is in a real bind economically. There's
They
not.
probably can't afford it, are they?
No, they got the other thing that it's not mentioned there. The world debt. Debt is a major problem. Again, this reflects.
Debt-based economy.
Yeah, it reflects the world power situation. That Europe, the West is basically in debt. The others, they've got the creditors is most of the.
So are the BRICS companies lending the money?
This is international finance, and it's a bit out of my and a bit of a mystery even to economists. This question of there's various countries in debt. Who is it who actually lends the money? Who's supposed to have this money that is being lent? On accountancy, you've got a credit on one, a debt on one side, and a credit on. It's a bit of a mystery. They may be borrowing. I don't know. It's very mysterious. Is that? It's a bit of a tricky one.
Or is everybody just borrowing and then lending?
Well, there's a complicated debt system that looks very vulnerable to.
Like a house of cards.
Yes, yeah. And if that happens, if that all collapses, then the debt countries obviously are going to be the worst sufferers, and that's going to accelerate these geopolitical changes. It's going to push the relative economic weight of America and Europe down even more.
Maybe that's necessary.
And some of the others will go up. So watch out for that as well coming up. We don't. It could happen. We don't know. But
okay. Overall, the EU is now midway through a second lost decade and in relentless economic decline.
right, relative economic decline. It's still growing just about 0.5% or 1%, but that's low, really. America is sort of 2 to 3% over a period of years. I'm not talking about quarterly things. This is a long-term sort of analysis here. But the rest of the world, China's growing about 6-7%. Down from
They've
10
dropped from
10%, but it's a drop from 10 to 6 or 7. America's on 3, say. Europe's on 1. So it does. So they're still gaining ground. India's on about 7%. Even Russia. We've heard all of the reports of Russia's supposed to be collapsing and under the pressure of this war. Has been growing at 3.5% for the last 3 years. Faster than America, way faster than Europe and Japan.
Well, we can't even build a small railway.
Yeah, well, that's a manifestation of ships, for example, naval ships. Takes us 7 years to build a destroyer.
The war could be over. If
China can build it in 18 months. So this is,
Is that to do with bureaucracy, red tape?
Well, partly, yeah, but it's just a reflection of
The Chinese say, right, we want that, we'll do it.
Yeah,
do it.
yeah. It's just a reflection of a declining economic power against a rising one. It's always happens the same as this. When you're declining, things even that you've done in the past seem to be more difficult to do, and the opposite for the rising power.
Okay. Britain, of course, supposedly cut itself free from Brussels after the 2016 Brexit referendum. But we continue to decline along with the rest of Europe, and we are dominated by a political, administrative and cultural elite that still hankers after a return to the EU's dubious embrace.
Yeah, so Britain has now about 2% of the global economic production and possibly about 3% of global defence expenditure. So that's lower than it's on a downward path. It's the lowest since forever, really. So we're only at best a medium power. All this stuff about global Britain that we hear sometimes in Britain, some of our politicians are going about, it's nonsense, really. At best, we've got a global presence in, presence.
Oh, well, I'd like to think that we can copy Trump in saying that make Britain great again.
Yeah, but at best, even Trump...
Can we do that?
Yeah, even Trump, at the best, they might revive a little bit the industrial, bring back the factories and so forth, if we have a determined effort to do it. There's no sign of that, really.
Open up the pits.
Yeah, but there's no sign of that within the British establishment.
Well, this is the electrical conspiracy to get us all in electric cars and
right. Well, this is
net zero.
That's the other thing. The green environmental agenda is strongest amongst Europe. Right.
China's not going to do that.
China actually is the biggest producer of these various green things as well. But it's the
the
biggest producer of both old industrial stuff and new industrial.
the best of all worlds.
Pretty much everything, really. But Europe is the strongest proponent of the sort of, along with Japan perhaps, the green agenda. But some of these other powers, they're all just doing their development for China and India.
It's all smoke and mirrors.
And Russia is more important, and America as well. And the environment, it's there if it impinges on their political situations, China, for example, and India, If you've got smoggy cities and that, well, that could affect production, might lead to social unrest. So they will pay some attention to it, but it's very much a secondary issue for them. Whereas Europe, at least with our power elite, it's the opposite way around. Not necessarily with the public, though.
Their ignorance of Europe's true plight is remarkable, and it means opportunities to be more agile, distinctive, and opportunistic in a new multipolar world have been largely squandered.
Right, so it's talking about the British establishment there, and I mentioned earlier they find it very
They're harking back to
yes, it's
better
very,
times.
yeah, well, yeah, and playing a bigger role in the world, and it's always difficult for any establishment or any country to adapt to decline and accept that you've less influence than you previously had. And
It doesn't mean you won't have an influence.
No, but less.
Just accept it,
Yeah, it's ultimately you're forced to simply by
whether you like it
because
or
of
not.
resources. If you try to do too much, you get caught out and find you can't.
And if you don't do anything,
I mean, this is happening now with classic cases. This business of the reassurance force in the Ukraine, and then when people have analysed it and said, well, what? First of all, it depends on Russia accepting NATO members, in which they won't. So it probably won't even happen. But if it did, we'd be in Britain, for example, would be a real problem. Britain and France are the only two military powers in Europe. Our forces have been cut back so much.
well, we're down to the bare bones of defence.
A low estimate was we could only maintain 1,000 men. Maybe that's a bit
I thought
pessimistic. I thought
Yeah.
5,000,
Yeah.
but in this reassurance force, well, Ukraine's got an army of 800,000. Russia 1.5 million. That's the scale.
I would have thought
the
boots
scale, yeah.
on the ground is an old hat idea.
Yeah, true. All right. Well, ships then. We've got 15 ships. We had frigates and destroyers. We had 50 in the Cold War. Now, some of those 15, half of them are all laid up on refits and repairs all the time. Aircraft, we've about 100, 500 during the Cold
And we
War.
have an aircraft carrier that doesn't have any.
With two aircraft
aircraft on
carriers.
it.
Yeah, with two aircraft carriers. We're waiting for American aircraft to come. They've got mechanical problems. So, we're
And we won't build our own aircraft again.
I think we do still build our own aircraft. There's
The Eurofighter, the Typhoon.
Typhoon, Eurofighter. So it does depend on cooperation with Europe. So Europe could possibly, by greater the old idea of the EU was that medium powers after World War II don't want to fight France and Germany, Britain, don't want to fight each other. But also medium powers combined together, we might have some weight that they no longer had.
Because I think, what if Russia and China combined their might?
Which they have done. Which they are doing. Well, it's gigantic.
Well, that's frightening.
Well, it's gigantic compared to anything that Britain can
Like men on the ground and hardware.
Everything. Yeah,
Everything.
both military, economic, the whole lot. Yeah, of course. So Europe might get a little bit of a boost, a temporary boost by some sort of boost in the EU project if they can.
So Europe and America would have to align.
Well, they
Totally.
they have been aligned. Yeah. But what we're seeing now is the multipolar world. Things manoeuvre around each other. So one of the features of a multipolar world, in theory, in general, and other examples that have been from history, is there's no fixed alliances. Alliances are a lot more looser because you've got force, so they can change sides.
And if Russia, China, and India combine,
Yeah, now I'll come to that in a minute because that has at least temporarily happened with this new this later meeting which happens after the article was written.
Okay.
I'll talk about that in a minute.
So, a great game is underway, says one Chinese academic, which will determine not just a new trading system, but a new international order, and the future of how nations govern themselves. Events in which the BRICS are likely to be more involved than the Brits.
Yeah, so a great game, that's a reference
We're
to
not at the game.
somebody called Kipling, who talked about something called The Great Game, which was a geopolitical game between Britain and Russia over Central Asia when Britain controlled India in 100 or whatever before the First World War. But that was only a regional one, so it's just a little analogy to that. But yeah, it's not a game, it's a kind of power game. It's the change in the geopolitical situation, which says it's happening anyway. Powers are having to adapt for it, and that last one, yeah, he's understating the case there, frankly.
Maybe it's like a long game of chess.
Yeah, Yes,
It doesn't end.
yeah, it never really ends. Nothing.
There's no checkmate.
There was somewhere, I can't remember it was, one analyst said that nobody's permanently up or permanently down. So, and the game, whatever, shouldn't really call it a game, but the struggle for world power never really ends. And the BRICS certainly are their up and coming powers. Britain, the West is going down. Britain isn't, obviously is only a medium power within the West, so our influence is going down. It's difficult to know what Britain can do about it's going to kind of retreat.
You say it's inevitable, so you have to just deal with it.
Yeah, so the sensible thing to do is to accept the inevitable and accept your new status and live with it and make the best of what limited opportunities.
Well, the establishment don't want. They find it hard to accept.
Yeah,
that.
because
they've
seen, because they're born in
their circumstances might slightly change.
Yeah, well, there's that as well. But as establishment is used to doing things in a certain way, in a certain where we've had great power in the past. This is all establishments, not just the British, but they just find it difficult to adapt to decline. It's a difficult thing.
Well, nobody really likes
declining. No,
change.
An empire declining is a tricky beast to manage.
The world is being remade. Democracy is once again under threat. And as the Alaska talks illustrate all too clearly, we are, for the first time in 500 years, condemned to mere observer status.
Right, so he's been in Europe and Britain, I think, there by the we. So 500 years ago, you had a kind of regional world like this, but which wasn't linked up, of course, pre-Columbian. Then you had the Age of Discovery and the rise of the European Age of Discovery and expansionism, which linked up the world, first geographically and then later on with globalised economics. So in a way, we're kind of going back in the patterns to what it was before, where you've got regional powers, China,
so the world,
Europe, Russia. America didn't exist there, but there were empires in the America, Mayans and not the Mayans, the Aztecs and the Incas. India with the Mughal, and you have Middle Eastern empires as well. So it's kind of going back to that, but of course now the world is all linked up.
So the world got too small with technology.
Yes,
internet.
yes.
So maybe it should go back and expand. You can't go back on what we've gone through.
With technology, we are where we were. But power is dissipated back out now to the other continents, away from Europe. So we're back to Europe's weight in the world is back to what it was before the Age of Discovery, when we weren't the most powerful, even then, at the beginning. And Britain was just a regional Northern European.
Well, we've always been David against Goliath, haven't we? As a landmass.
Britain or Europe, what are you talking about now?
Great Britain.
Yeah, but sometimes by technological innovation, the big one being the Industrial Revolution, we grew beyond our
size,
apparent geographical small size. So that can happen. But what happens is after a while, everybody starts to copy you. So you go up, you get a temporary gain, as Britain did as the first industrial power in the 19th century, mid-19th century, when we were the most powerful country, even though geographically we did have the empire as well, of course, in those days. But as soon as other countries started industrialising and copying
it's hard to sustain the
advantage. They catch up and then it declines. And now kind of all the countries are now following up. So unless somebody can gain a technological leap like the Industrial Revolution, which isn't impossible but is rare, then it goes to the greater geographical size in terms, resources.
So would you like to give your conclusion of what you think?
Well, I broadly agree with O'Neill's analysis there, that definitely that's what's happening. He's quite perceptive in terms of a journalist. Obviously, he has his own political views. He's lamenting the sort of pressure that democracy is under and the fact that we've got less influence and the ideological dimension is less important than it was. But that's fair.
Maybe the version of democracy just has to adapt to the new
Well, I
situation?
think what's going to have to happen is that, yeah, the West, America, Europe, and Britain are going to have to accept that they've got to share this planet with other power centres who have, some of them have got systems of government that we don't like. So we just got to accept that we've no right to tell them what to do internally, but that doesn't mean we have to change our democracy internally. And obviously that's another issue really of what happens there. There's a lot of work to be done there, no doubt. There's erosion of democracy inside the country, inside the West, but that's a kind of separate issue.
Well, I think we should concentrate on our own affairs
Yes.
and solve our problems.
Yeah, and in a sense, these geopolitical changes are forcing that to happen. The fact that we don't have the influence on America's influence has been still powerful, of course, but reduced from what it is. Europe certainly reduced now. So I was going to say, so broadly, I agree with what his analysis there. I was just going to update it for you that after that article was written, we've had another meeting of these are the Eastern powers, something called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So just say a little bit about that. It's formed in 2001. It's a Eurasian grouping. Again, it's a grouping led by China, as the name Shanghai was presumably where it was, the first meeting and set it up. So because China and Russia are the heart of it.
North Korea?
It's not actually a member, no, but there were 10 core members, China, Russia, the various Central Asian countries, what they call the STANs, Kazakhstan and various ones there.
Iran?
And yes, I'm just going to say the 10 original members, and then, but since then, that's 2001, it has grown. So India is added on, and that's significant.
Brazil?
Not Brazil, no. Brazil's in the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, if you think of the map.
Oh, just east.
Is broadly speaking Eurasia. Eurasia, right. So Russia and China, Central Asian countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. India, Pakistan, and recently Iran have joined on. So this is, again, another massive grouping of countries. There's some overlap, of course, with the BRICS. Russia, China and India are part of the BRICS. They're also part of this organisation. It's been below the horizon in terms of, people's knowledge of it up until recently. They have a meeting every year, and this time it's become significant, this meeting. Not only have the basic members been there have been some other observer members, and these are significant. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Malaysia, North Korea is tagging along and has joined the meeting later. So it's again the fact that China's been able to convene the total of 26 countries, I think it is altogether. So
where does Australia sit in
Australia
everything?
is with the West.
See, that's,
yes.
well,
yeah.
geographically.
Yeah, the West as a cultural geopolitical entity is Europe. Sorry, the United States obviously is the centre, North America, Canada, Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand, and Israel perhaps as well.
So Australia and Japan sit in
the American,
geographically in...
Well, geopolitically, yeah, and geographically. As I mentioned, the American Empire expanded after World War II across the Pacific, so Australia was within the border, so was Japan.
So the world could be sliced in half.
Sliced in half.
Yeah,
well, at the moment, the configuration is the West against the rest. The West is sort of, trying to hang on to its power, and that's consolidating consolidating at least a temporary alliance of the non-West. And this meeting, as I mentioned, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in China, is a manifestation.
And wasn't it the 80th anniversary of the end of the
the Second World War? Yes, so China is exaggerating.
And they showed off the hardware and
So the end of this meeting, China, it coincides with the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in the Pacific, in which China was involved. China's exaggerated its role in that, but nevertheless, it's a showpiece, and they had a big, massive military parade.
There's some quite impressive hardware on show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's lots of new weaponry coming out of these drones and
Some of them look like spaceships.
underwater drones and laser guns, all sorts
Oh,
of modern stuff.
hypersonic missiles.
Hypersonic missiles, yeah, exactly.
They're frightening themselves.
Yeah, those are cruise missiles essentially, but with a hypersonic means at least 5 times the speed of sound, and there's various versions, land-based, sea-based,
And they can go long distances.
and long distances, yeah. And,
America won't like that, probably.
well, interestingly, in the Pacific, America, of course, uses its naval power to projectile. It did during World War II and still does, but, to maintain its strategic border in the Pacific. But China has got probably the biggest air force in the world now, and a lot of land-based and sea-based of these hypersonic missiles. And these
But
are,
they can just fire them from Beijing, probably.
yeah, from the Chinese mainland. And these have got a range now of over 1,000 miles. And the Americans are becoming concerned that that's a threat to their aircraft carrier.
Because
groups.
Russia haven't perfected their yet the
Well,
hypersonic.
they've got some, yeah, they've got them.
But they keep crashing or something, you know.
Well, not necessarily. And Russia and China are cooperating, of course, militarily as well. As well as in terms of buying Russian oil
And technologically.
and technologically, yeah, everything.
So they're sharing the intellectual
again,
property.
Again, this is balance of power 101. The number 2 and 3 in the world combine the strength.
America's got no chance of competing head to head.
Well, I won't say no chance, but this is the battle. This is the geopolitical battle of the next few decades. This is the configuration. So we'll see how it.
Well, the decline won't happen overnight for America.
No, but I think it will continue simply because the others are growing faster.
And then at the beginning we said Trump is a businessman, so you would think he'd try and broker a deal.
Yes, well,
That benefits him and
exactly.
them.
Well, he's gone America first, so he's pulled away from this multilateral empire as a way of doing things, and during the Cold War and the post-Cold War, to America first. So he's he's focused on making these deals accommodate. That's a good thing. That's something you can do. Of course, he's only there for 3 more years.
and then he has to step down.
He has to step down, but we'll see.
Who's next?
Yes, because there are certainly big signs that there's an America First movement formed now in America.
I think the people are behind it.
Well, it's a divided society, America, isn't it? 50-50. We don't know who's going to win the election. It could go back to the Democrats.
Depends about the candidates.
Yeah, but if Trump can, if the MAGA phenomena can transmute into a kind of America First beyond Trump,
without
and
him.
not just reliant on him as a single individual, then yes, you will see America's global position shifting, certainly to unilateralism and possibly to semi-isolationism.
So they can be successful on their
Within
own.
that, yeah, of course they can.
You don't have to.
Yeah,
be involved
Yeah,
in
they're in a
everything.
much stronger position than Europe is because they've got more resources. North America's bigger. It's more or less. It could be self-sufficient. Things they can buy from other countries that are cheaper, but if it's really struggling.
And just have a trading relationship.
Yeah.
And not a military
Well, they won't abandon the military. No.
dominance.
They won't abandon the military strength. Not easily, but they could be pushed back.
That's
So you were
interesting.
talking about in East Asia about America's strategic border will be forced to retreat, and Taiwan will be the first vulnerable target, as we mentioned earlier. Some of these other countries in between, Japan, South Korea, the various Southeast Asian countries, will be forced to reassess how the balance of their relationships between America and China. So I would just say the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, the other significance of it is that India is a member, and it's been a bit of an awkward member in the past, but now because of the business of the tariffs, Trump, just to recap the detail, Trump, because of he's got an uncertain relationship with Russia over Ukraine, and they're threatening to put tariffs on Russian oil and on the countries that buy Russian oil, the two principal one, China and India. And as we speak, there are tariffs on India, and that's upset the Indians. Instead, the Indians have responded, instead of saying, well, we're not buying Russian oil, we can also buy Russian arms, and we've got a good relationship with Russia. As a multipolar power, They've not openly said that, but we're not. They've not openly said to America that we're carrying on buying all they are doing, but by playing a big role in this latest Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting and being bonhomie with both Russia and patching up difficult relations with China, they're signalling that we've got the multipolar world. It's here now. I think we've discussed this.
I think it's way further down the road.
Then people
We
realise.
just don't know about it.
Yeah, then people realise. Yeah, I mean,
It's already been discussed.
this topic's come up in other other Enlightenment defended.
Yeah, you've had many.
debates but I think we can say now that it's here. It's this is.
We've arrived.
Well, at least these two summits show that it's been there under the scenes, but these are putting it up front, and now the world's realising, even liberal commentators.
Well, they decided when they were going to
Yeah.
make it.
Yeah. But China is taking the opportunity of
It's been
Trump's.
decades or 10 years or.
Well, it's been developing since 2000, really.
25
gradually,
years.
slowly, yeah. But now we can say definitely it's arrived. And for a country like India, one of the four.
Well, they'll never want to attack us because
No, they won't want to attack us, but they're
they
responding.
like us, don't they?
Yeah, India, as I said earlier, is balancing both its relations with Russia and China and with America.
And us.
And
To a certain.
and the rest of the world. But, well, like I said, Britain,
Well, they like the British, don't they?
they do. I mean, they're the next colony, as it were. It's kind
Well,
of a bit,
we will leave that
it's
aside.
a little bit awkward, isn't it? But Britain's a bit, not a big player. That will be going a bit too far, but a medium size.
Because you could discuss the diplomatic. How do you navigate?
Yeah, well, with a multipolar world, there's no fixed alliances, so you're trying to have good relations.
There's still
with
room
them all.
for
But you've got
diplomacy.
pointers. India's got an option, so it's able to signal by this meeting that it's friendly with Russia and China,
So it
and
raises their influence.
it's showing that they're independent, an independent actor in world affairs. They're not just following the United States, and that they're not going to just because America puts
They're not
tariffs
going to bow
tariffs
down.
on. They're not going to stop buying Russian oil. So that's something for America to think about.
So India rise.
Yeah, India's
Probably America would respect that.
Yeah, well, America's been making opens to India to try and get friendly with India, but recently it's gone a little bit diplomatically sour over these tariffs and relations with Russia. So they're just signalling to America and the West, of course, that the multipolar world is here and it's giving these other powers options. They're not just going to have to.
But from a British perspective, we've got our own battles to fight internally
Yeah.
in the near future.
That's into obviously every country has its domestic politics, which is kind of outside the parameters of this article.
But personally, I would say concentrate on that.
Yeah, and the smaller countries that don't have world influence do tend, well, all they got is domestic politics largely.
But Switzerland does all right.
Yeah.
Have they ever got involved in anything?
They've not been in a war for many centuries. I don't know.
They're quite happy.
Yeah,
aren't they?
well, they're openly neutral. I don't think they're even a member of the United Nations. So they maintain strict neutrality and they keep well away from it. Doesn't mean they don't trade with other countries. Obviously, they're surrounded.
They have no litter
a landlocked country, right? Yeah.
and plenty of gold.
And gold from other countries as well because
Nazi gold. I watched the documentary
Right,
recently.
okay, yeah, because of the banking.
But they don't talk about that.
No, that's all secret banking stuff, isn't it? So the upshot then of this article is that it's a pivotal moment in the change of the world balance of power.
But can we have a positive outlook still
From whose perspective?
as the West?
Well, the West, America is adapting under Trump by going unilateralist.
So if they are,
But
then we will.
but its overall power is moving from a global to a regional. We mentioned that America's influence in Europe and the Pacific is pulling in, and they're concentrated on the hemisphere. Europe is the big loser. Japan also is a big loser. In the 1980s, it postulated that Japan might become one of the 5 powers in a multipolar world. That didn't transpire. Japan slowed its growth after 1990s and has shrunk back since and has not really developed the military and political power to match its previous quite large economic size. So Japan is also in decline and is now finding itself to adapt between China and America. Europe may try to come together, may try to become a fifth pole, but as the article mentioned, economically it's struggling and it's not got a lot of money to
I
spend.
think it's going the right way in the sense that it's unlikely that there'll be another world war.
Right, well, we're coming on to stability of multipolar systems now, so, you know...
If you don't pick on them, they won't.
Yeah, they're going to have to,
retaliate.
basically, all four are going to have to accommodate to each other and accept the regional spheres of influence. So that's where we are, I think.
Good.
Could you explore how it might impact the chances of further growth in the potential of the Enlightenment? You know, the liberty, progress, and autonomy.
Right, I think, well, we'd have to involve you in the discussion, I think, for that, Ray, because you're the expert. The traditional view, what would you
No, I
make?
wanted to see what you
Yeah.
think.
Well, I can only put from the geopolitical perspective. You think the Enlightenment is, obviously it emerges in the West, doesn't it? So the Enlightenment grows over the last 500 years.
So it might
of-
decline.
Yeah, but it grows, when is it, the 16th and 17th and 18th century, so it's just after the age.
Because Russia won't be promoting Enlightenment.
It's after the age of discovery, so you could say that the spread of the Enlightenment goes with the growth of the West. So if the West is going to relatively decline,
Didn't
it
that
won't.
happen after the Roman Empire declined?
Yeah,
Enlightenment
it did.
took a downturn.
Yeah, but didn't disappear completely.
It still existed.
If you recall, the knowledge was maintained in the monasteries and came back eventually through from the Christian Church and then a reaction
And
against
then
the
the
Christian Church. So it doesn't
Renaissance. Huh?
the Renaissance first, yes, and then the Age of Discovery, yeah. So,
So-
it goes down after the Roman Empire, that becomes the Dark Ages,
Mm.
but then it doesn't disappear completely, it's preserved, and then comes back
So
in the Renaissance, which is 14th century.
my guess is there'll be a similar.
Well, that's a very long-term perspective. I can't project ahead from it. I can project ahead a few decades, but this is the geopolitical
This, but
pattern.
the
for the next few
Enlightenment
decades.
Defended is about making long-term projections, even though they may be conjectures
Yeah,
without certainty.
right, okay.
In fact, that's one of the things that the Enlightenment accepts, is that all knowledge is but a woven web of guesses.
Mm.
Yeah.
So how do you think that an increasingly multipolar world may impact or enhance or aggravate or retard the chances of the further growth of liberty, autonomy and progress?
It can still grow.
That is a complicated question, and I think that this is for another podcast as well.
It might decline in the east and still exist in the west.
Right, okay, so start with the decline of the West in geopolitical terms. So you would think that would be detrimental because the other power centres are.
But we don't know to what extent it
No.
will decline.
Well,
It might rise in the west as
Right.
one declines.
Right, okay, just be careful now. Well, I can't see the West coming back geopolitically. This is the pattern for the next few decades, not for centuries, Ray, but for the next few decades. I can't project beyond that. There could be some new factor coming in a few decades that will,
Could be
change.
nuclear annihilation.
Well, there's shock things like that, big things. That
Big
can-
events.
Yeah, these are things that are not fixed, but it takes pretty something big. That's a massive thing, obviously. Something like that.
There would be a big change.
Yeah, well, we don't. Yeah, that would obviously affect all these geopolitical trends and Enlightenment trends, everything.
Because the West couldn't the West go that way to try and
Go which way?
fire off a nuclear missile at
Well,
Moscow
To try and
to try and drag back.
preempt his
Power.
decline. Well, there's always been that preemptive strikes in military terms of declining power.
Like an injured lion,
Yeah.
do the daft
Yeah,
things.
but nuclear, you've got to discount nuclear. I mean, that would change everything and it would destroy everybody, including the West. So
Well, there are some crazy people about.
Yeah, and hopefully not within these four big powers, the nuclear powers.
Yeah, it's the other certain ones that.
Yeah.
If we look at not so much the deliberate the deliberate deployment of Enlightenment principles within the domestic countries, let's say the UK or Germany or France or America, but have a look at the possibility that the development of a multipolar world may have as an incidental effect that there is more liberty in the world, more progress, more autonomy. For example, to give one example, one aspect of a multipolar world is the absence of a policing hyperpower in trying to impose a particular set of values, say democracy, in less developed countries. If that is rolled back, then presumably we have overall a move toward a more enlightened world.
Well, yeah, so I definitely agree with that will happen. That is happening as the West is, the hyperpower becomes a multi-power, then a multipolar world, its ability to project values, and whether you agree with those values or not, will be more limited. So there could be less wars in that sense, and its capacity to do that will be less. So there'll be less of these medium-sized and small-sized wars where America is, trying to influence these third world countries.
Well, if you've got less wars, then you can focus more on.
Well, then you've got to think.
There's more freedom.
You're freer.
Maybe.
Well,
the answer is
almost by definition, it's logical. It follows if you're not in
less of that, more of that.
Well, hang on. I just on the war business. We need to then think about. We've got four. They've got to come to agreement to avoid war at the top.
I think they might have already
which I think they probably
talked about it.
They will do. Even Trump is saying he doesn't want nuclear. He
doesn't want any war.
He doesn't. Yeah, and he certainly doesn't want nuclear war, and he's fully aware of that in his relations with Russia over the Ukraine. And the same goes for Russia and China and India. They're all sensible powers, really. So they will come to an agreement. The last multipolar system was between 1815 and 1914, dominated by Europe. But they had something called the Concert of Europe and the Congress system. So they had it's kind of like a consensual balance of power where they accepted that there was no single one that was dominant, and they accepted that the basic rules of the game to meet and have conferences to deal with problems and little wars that cropped up here and there. So it's happened before. So there's no reason why a multiple.
Well, as one of Ray's Levinson, Georgia instead of war.
Yeah, that's Churchill. Yeah. So you will definitely get that. Now, in terms of influence of ideologies, the Enlightenment kind of Western ideology, we don't know what, in terms of global ideology, there's only one global ideology, really. It's Western liberalism, which I'll let Ray
so that will change.
Discern how the Enlightenment...
Because it won't be global.
It won't be global. So we don't know exactly what China, Russia, India, and some of these medium countries are going to bring to the game.
Different ideologies.
In terms of ideologies, I don't think they don't have any global idea. They're not trying to project. I mean, we call them authoritarian, but they're not saying, well, we want an authoritarian world.
The Chinese don't.
No.
John Stuart Mill, one of the greatest expounders of classical liberalism, which is embraced by Enlightenment thinking, liberty, autonomy, and progress, made this point that a libertarian or a society that has liberty can allow experiments in living. And if you have experiments in living and that they are autonomous and they're not interfered with, as you would have in a state of a multipolar world, you have then a move toward greater enlightenment, seems to me.
All right, well, there'll be autonomy in the sense that these non-Western powers will be autonomous and they will do their own thing, as the West will, and maybe America and Europe even may go in separate directions. We don't know. Now, as what were the other two things? Liberty and what was the other one?
Progress and autonomy.
Right, so autonomy, progress, well, I suppose it depends how you define it. Now, what these non-Western countries, whether they will have liberty and progress, it depends what you mean. I mean, there will be progress in terms of economic or whatever, technological progress. That's kind of automatic almost, isn't it? Now, how much of that there'll be in these non-Western societies? I mean, O'Neill in his article there, he's kind of characterising some of these other places as autocracies, whereas really there's sort of grey areas between democracy and autocracy, and maybe he's been a bit harsh on one or two of those, like India and Brazil, even Russia, you know. So they're all going to have their own whatever semi-versions of autocracy, democracy, and things in between. They're a bit of a mixture and not difficult to pin down.
Not everything occurs just within the boundaries of each individual nation state.
Right, true.
You will have maybe this is what I'm wanting to discuss. Would you have greater chances of, communication, cooperation, scientific both, and trade between these autonomous?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, China, for example, is talking about multilateralism now. Whether that's just a short-term response to the fact that America has gone unilateralist and semi-isolationist, maybe it's a short-term tactic, so we can't be sure whether they really believe in it. But the fact that we've got the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China and Russia, but led by China, mostly this, is setting up its own web of global institutions, these without the West. And the West has still got its institutions, and there's still the United Nations is not very powerful, but at least nominally includes most of the countries of the world. So yeah, of course, all these, both East and West, they're going to have to talk to each other, and there will be some new, what they call architecture of the institutions, and the way diplomacy happens, and also in the economic sphere as well. China's challenge is largely economic, really, rather than ideological. They're not trying to spread communism anymore.
Science is generally global, even now.
As a race, you want to progress.
And with less wars, there's just more chance of doing cooperative projects.
It frees it up.
Yeah. So that will carry on. Scientific cooperation, I think will carry on. Now, I suppose if it gets into a new Cold War, East against West, then that will perhaps not happen, because each will then, you'll get two separate systems. But if it doesn't get too fraught, and the four, whatever...
You could join together
with the multipolar world, they come to an accommodation which accepts, as you say, autonomy, I think especially is the one of those three that is most likely to happen.
National sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly, as the basis. Well, all three, India, Russia and China, they're all strong on national sovereignty, even though Russia has invaded Ukraine, and the West says, well, how can that be national sovereignty because you've invaded a sovereign country? But Russia doesn't regard Ukraine as a sovereign country, so they say it is just redressing
part of Russia.
Something that's happened bad to them, i.e. the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. China doesn't consider Taiwan a sovereign country. So there is, tension there within that. But broadly speaking, it's been the West in the past that's imposed on these other countries what the non-West refers to as human rights imperialism. I think the phrase was first coined by the leader of Malaysia some decade in the 1990s. So they're pushing for autonomy and national sovereignty. Scientific cooperation, I think we've got that now, haven't we? Across East and West. I mean, China and Russia are involved in scientific cooperation.
You don't have to agree on everything.
No. Space programs, for example, is a good example. The International Space Station, Russia is a space power, so they were relying on Russian rockets to send astronauts to and fro for a while when the American one wasn't working. So you've got scientific cooperation across there. That will no reason why that wouldn't continue.
Would it be
suppose-
enhanced? The question is, would a multipolar world enhance scientific cooperation?
I think it will.
It could certainly, yeah. It will certainly allow it. Yeah,
It frees it up to happen.
yeah.
Because if you're not doing invading that
Yeah.
and looking after them, you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna, as I said with the 19th century Europe business, they're gonna have to come to an accommodation, and there will be some new global, a new balance of this architecture of this coming, of things that they have to cooperate under. I suppose the question will
You
be,
don't have to cooperate on everything either.
No, you don't. There'll be some.
You can do your own thing, and
Exactly,
certain
and
things you
that'll
can
be part of
progress together.
That'll be part of the new of the new architecture.
and it might be a better
So that
makeup.
that definitely would be better because, there'll be things they like places.
That's autonomy.
Yeah, exactly. As I say, autonomy.
You have a choice
Autonomy
to do.
implies the right to secede,
and
to
do your
not
own-
take part,
Yeah.
to
So
not listen.
yeah. So autonomy in the sense of the individual, the non-Western power, and the West. That definitely will be enhanced in the sense compared to what we've got now. But we don't know what the non-West is going to bring to
The table.
the table, and whether and really this is perhaps something where you would come in, Ray, whether what it does bring could be considered
Is
enlightened,
the table.
could be considered enlightened or not, and how that's, but it's going to happen because this change in the balance of power will determine. He's going to push through. It's here now, and it's going to push through not just into geopolitics but into economics, and we can't have nuclear war, so they're going to have to accommodate, and with that accommodation, then they'll start to say, well, we can cooperate and have room for
Yes.
in other non-political areas.
Yeah, the real embodiment of Enlightenment values doesn't require nations or their representatives to be running around with banners with Kant and Voltaire proudly displayed.
True.
The ideas can be embodied, rolled out and deployed as real things independently
Right.
of ideological posturing, as you might.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
that sounds good.
Yeah. So that prompts me a question I've just been thinking about to ask you, Ray. Take as things are now, say, or as they have been with kind of globalized economics, maybe as well. What extent do you think Enlightenment values, as you would define them, because I suppose there are other people who disagree on what exactly Enlightenment values are, how far do you think they've expanded beyond the West already to these non-Western countries? Is it a lot, not at all, or what? This is a bit of a mystery to me. Perhaps you could comment on that.
Yes, the interesting question that crops up immediately there is how would you measure it? So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you would measure it, but so I would just be giving an impression, an intuitive impression that my guess is that that those values have spread.
Yeah, because you've got globalized economics, so everybody accepts the sort of what was originally a Britain and America economic system that spread to Europe, I suppose, and then there's variance within it, but everybody kind of does the same thing there. You say science, everybody accepts science, which again started with the Enlightenment, started in the West. The Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, they're doing science just the same. So there is the Western spread of these things that happened over the last 2-3 centuries has been taken on by them.
Yes.
So it's part of them now, and it's non-controversial, I would think, and most of that.
Insofar as central planning in the economy has been basically is now defunct and rejected,
Yeah, that's
the
true.
people just as a consequence of that, people would automatically be freer.
Yeah,
In some
well,
respects,
liberalism says that that's economic freedom, don't they? And they say that that's economic freedom within the domestic and individual scheme. So yeah,
Yeah,
well,
however,
communism, I think, I think we have to say is pretty much gone now. The Soviet Union collapsed.
yeah.
China is only at best, okay, I know we've had our debates on that. At best, one country, two systems, at best half communist. And communism serves the purpose now in China of legitimising the internal domestic control of the Communist Party. They're not expanding it across the world anymore like it was attempted to do under Mao. And they're not particularly using it. I don't know, it's a debate. We do know. We mutually know a communist, don't we, who thinks that 60% of the Chinese economy is still central planning, so I suppose there's an argument over that. But largely speaking, it looks like that has gone. There's a big influence in the world. It might hold out in a few bits here and there, but as a global influence, it's not longer the case.
Yeah, so to the culmination of the arguments and debate over Ludwig von Mises's devastating attack on economic calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth and Hayek's contributions, very few people in scholarly circles accept it's a non-starter. It's a non-starter.
Yeah, and I would add
but I would add that you said that being freer from central planning is what is known as economic freedom. Hayek made the important point that economic freedom is coordinated almost in the same body as personal freedom. The two are not really separable logically.
Right, okay, so 2 points to that. To add to the fact that academia has kind of debunked pure Marxism, as it will, even in practice, the sort of leaders of the communist states have accepted that, that's a less efficient method of mobilising resources. So in geopolitical and strategic terms, therefore, adapts some version of capitalism which is more effective at doing that for the purposes of national power. So communism kind of loses on that as well. Now, the business of whether liberalism in the sort of social sphere, how far that's linked with liberalism in the economic sphere, presumably non-liberals might not agree with that. I don't know. That is going to be tested, though, isn't it, in these non-Western economies that are, to certain degrees, authoritarian in their political system, China being the obvious one. Liberals, when the 1990s came and the spread of democracy and market economics, they all assumed that China, for example, would have problems and that they would come round to democracy, because if they started adapting the economic version of liberalism, that they would be forced to accept or not forced, but by
personal liberties,
whatever method. Who was it? Mill, was it? You mentioned somebody who linked the two.
Hayek.
Some kind of infusion, some invisible infusion.
Friedrich Hayek,
yeah,
Austrian economist,
right, would spread to personal liberty. Now, so far, and we've had since Deng Xiaoping changed things, when was that, 1978, so we've had 50 years almost, 45 years, is it? 47 years. China has maintained its authoritarian political system. There's a kind of a deal there, isn't there, within China, that you support the Communist Party, but will lose some economic freedoms and make the country rich, including making the individual people rich or richer, and that certainly has happened. So the verdict is out on that, isn't it? We still don't know.
I think it's a matter of degree. I think Hayek wasn't saying that if you don't have central planning, everyone has free speech and the ability to be free in all respects that would be endorsed by the leading libertarian theorists.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of degree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think he was making the point that it's very difficult logically or abstract to actually separate those two things. The kind of a freedom to do business, but not have freedom personally.
Right. Okay.
Well,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to put a pause in that to say that's wrong. But I would just look at see events play out in these various countries to see whether that, winning the test, international relations is international politics is the kind of test. It's like the ultimate test of this. It's being played out, and we will see what happens there. And in other countries as well. Obviously, there's a lot of other countries who are between China and the West, as it were, in terms of the balance of these things that are whatever between authoritarianism and democracy, if you like, these various shades of grey. We'll see how it plays out in those as well. So, the verdict's out on that. History will tell us. So...